Once again, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this Wyndham Conservation District webinar. Special thanks to the Lake Champlain Sea Grant Program and the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation for helping put this together. Our presenter tonight is Cristin Ashmanakas from the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation, and she is going to give us a crash course on all things septic.
Good evening, and just so you know, I'm working from home this evening, and I have a toddler who may make an appearance at some point during this. So, because 2 hours is kind of a long time to go without mommy. So, with no further ado, I am going to share my screen with you. I'm just going to make it so I can still see you guys. All right. So you should be seeing my screen at this point. All right. I'll bring up the chat bar. Okay. So wastewater systems. I'm Cristin Ashmanakas. I work for the Drinking Water Groundwater Protection Division. I do a little of everything in drinking water and groundwater, from public water supplies to personal home permits for wastewater and water supplies. I also do all of the innovative alternative technologies approvals, as well as compliance issues. So I mainly work for what's known as the Regional Office Program. And the Regional Office Program has 5 offices spread throughout the state. Right, we haven't been working in those offices now for a little over a year, but we still have people in those regions, regional engineers who are responsible for those areas. They will do site visits. Those are the people you should call for your particular area, right? So you guys are down here and you'd be serviced by the Springfield Regional Office. The Springfield Regional Office has for an administrative assistant, Terry Lynn, who is incredibly helpful. If you ever need to call that office. And if she can't answer the question, she will pass you off to either Jeff Sveck, who is one of the regional engineers for the Springfield office, or Terry Shearer, who is one of the other regional engineers for the Springfield office. He's also in charge of all the regional engineers for the southern half of the state. And so the Regional Office Program does soil-based wastewater systems and water supplies. We do wastewater flows that are less than 6,500 gallons per day. That sort of magic cutoff number is because above that, there are EPA requirements, as well as reporting to the EPA. And so those are known as the Indirect Program. It's similar guidelines, rules, science. The main difference is the fact that they have to then report almost monthly various aspects of a wastewater system to the EPA. For a typical single family home, there's no need to report. So potable water supplies, these are water supplies that are not public water supplies, right? So these are going to be your typical home. These can also be offices if they're servicing less than 25 people. We do municipal water and sewer connections, subdivision of lands, right? And the reason why we're in charge of subdivisions is so we make sure that you're not giving away your solution to your future potential wastewater or water supply problems, right? So you can't subdivide your property without a permit from us. We do testing and education services for licensed designers and the public, just like what we're doing tonight. And we review and approve innovative and alternative wastewater products. And when we're talking about wastewater systems and water supplies, this really applies to just about every Vermonter in the state of Vermont. There's very few people who we won't at some point in their ownership of property in Vermont that we won't interact with. And we issue approximately 25,000 permits each year. That's actually up in the last year due to the very hot real estate market, combined with everybody suddenly living at home and a toilet paper shortage there for a while. We were seeing about a 30% increase in failed systems. So we are actually on set. Last year, I believe we did just under 3,000 permits, and this year we're looking at possibly breaking the 3,000. All right, so for this webinar, we've done the introductions. We're going to do some on-site wastewater systems 101, wastewater systems in the water supply rules, and preventative maintenance. Then we'll have a general question and discussion session. But again, if you have questions, I will stop sort of as we transition from one to another to sort of, so we're not waiting to the very end to hit all of your questions. So wastewater 101, how do soil-based wastewater treatment systems work? Well, they start in you, right? The very first thing to a wastewater system is actually the bacteria, the flora and the fauna living inside of your gut. Right, and so this is a cute cartoon. This is actually healthy flora and fauna that was cultured from someone's waste, right? And this is what you sort of want to see. This means that this person is healthy, right? And so this is an anaerobic conditions, right? You don't have oxygen typically hanging out in your gut. So these are anaerobic bacteria that are hanging out there. And that anaerobic treatment continues in your septic tank, right? You don't have oxygen exchange in your septic tank. So about 80% of your human waste is actually dead or alive colonies of bacteria, right? There's a little bit of cellulose left over from digestion of things that can't be digested, but most of your human waste is actually not what we think of as food. It's actually the dead and dying bacteria. And so these bacterial colonies get sloughed off. They go out into your septic tank. There's a lack of oxygen in your septic tank, and they continue to do their work, right? And so what is their work? They break down solids, right? That's what we want them doing in our gut. They break down solids, they break them into their basic nutrients, and then they do have the unfortunate byproduct of releasing biogas, right? It's one of the natural byproducts, which is also, again, what's happening in your septic tank, right? If you've ever been around when someone has popped the top off your septic tank in order to pump it out or to check it or to clean your filter, right? A stink typically comes out. That stink is the biogas, is the CO2 and the methane. The more methane, the more it smells, right? And that's telling you have a healthy septic tank, right? So it's breaking down the solids, releasing its natural components, also releasing biogas. Right, so we have this digestion, no oxygen environment. We've got lots of anaerobic bacteria, right? And so they actually should keep your sludge level fairly low, right? If you have a healthy septic tank, they will constantly keep breaking down those solids. That's why we don't fill up our septic tank with solids within a year, right? It can take a decade, right? I check mine every spring. I check my sludge levels, and my sludge levels stay relatively low. And as long as they keep doing that, I can typically go about 10 years before I need a pumping. The EPA suggests every 3 years, and that's because if you have a less than healthy septic tank, that's sort of the minimum amount of time before you would need a pump. And so a lot of people just use that. Those of us who know how to check ours, we can go a lot longer as long as we have a healthy tank. Right, and they sort of what they use is when they're determining that 3 years is came from people who are on constant antibiotics because they would be constantly killing off the gut bacteria and the bacteria in their septic tank. That's how long it took to the point where you had to have a pump if you were constantly introducing antibiotics. Right, and so you've got your solids at the bottom, which we refer to as sludge. And then you have your wastewater. And above your wastewater is your scum, right? So anything that's going to float in your toilet is going to float out in your septic tank, right? So these are all the oils that don't get broken down. The bacteria don't particularly like them either. They do create a scum layer at the top. And then the wastewater comes in, everything settles to their layer, and the way it's designed so that the wastewater can then move. There should be a filter here to try to keep any additional solids or scum from leaving the tank, and just having wastewater go out. And this is what I tend to clean every spring. And then it goes out to your drain field. So once it leaves the anaerobic conditions, the no oxygen conditions of your septic tank, where you're getting rid of your solids, what you have left is nutrient-rich water, right? And this nutrient-rich water leaves the septic tank. It goes out. Typically, there's often what's known as a D box that sort of separates it out along your drain field or your leach field, right? And there's perforated pipes, and we design these so that they are within the oxygen zone, so that we have aerobic bacteria who love oxygen, who will now act on that wastewater, right? And aerobic bacteria are going to break down carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus. They make it biologically available to the plants. They also will create nitrogen gas, so that we're taking all of these nutrients that the anaerobes put into the water. The aerobic bacteria will now take out of the water and will leave behind clean drinking water that's going to go back into our aquifer. So why do we care about treating why do we care about treating wastewater? The main reason is human health. The proper treatment of human waste is considered to be the single greatest achievement in human history. It beats out medical science, all of medical science's achievements for saving the most human lives, right? So we take our jobs very seriously. Our goal is to make sure that we are putting back water that will not harm the environment or the humans around it, right? Because we are trying to keep out bacteria, viruses, microorganisms, other things that can cause disease from reaching the groundwater and potentially drinking water or surface water. Right, and the other reason is we're protecting the environment. So pathogens and excess nutrients, if they're not properly cared for, and if there's not enough separation, can go through your system, hit the groundwater, the water table, and travel out to surface water. When it travels out to surface water, you've essentially introduced miracle grow right out into your lake, which you might think at first sounds great, but lakes are kind of nicely balanced where they have the exact amount of nutrients that they want and need and can handle. When we suddenly introduce too many, right, well, we're going to have sudden algae growth. And algae growth can cause the oxygen to get used up, which can lead to fish kills, right? It can cause, if it's algae that tends to float on the surface, you're going to have issues with light blocking and die off of plants that live at lower levels. You're also, with pathogens getting into the surface waters, you end up getting sick. You can have blooms of cyanobacteria, which is what we've had a problem with on some of the lakes, really all over New England for the last couple of years, right? And if your dog drinks it, or somebody who's immunocompromised drinks that water, and suddenly we have some serious medical problems. So our goal is to keep pathogens and excess nutrients from reaching groundwater. All right, so how do they work out in the leach field? Is you've got these perforated pipes. These perforated pipes are surrounded by stone, right? And that's going to create an oxygen-rich environment. Oxygen tends to hang out in the first 3 feet, right? So we insist that these stone and pipes be in that top 3 foot layer so that aerobic bacteria that likes the oxygen, really has a nice environment. The stone provides pore space for the water to come in. It also provides places for the bacteria to hang out and do their thing. Right, and we also require that it be 3 feet of separation between the base of that stone and where seasonal high water table is, right? Because that's going to give you 3 additional feet for various aerobic, anaerobic activity to happen that's really going to finish and polish all of the cleaning of the water. Right, and we also require it to be at least 4 feet between the base of those stones and bedrock, right? And the reason for that is because you can end up with mounding, right? So water comes down, and if there's nowhere for it to dissipate out down to, it tends to create a bit of a mound. And that can drive the anaerobic conditions, right? Because water drives the oxygen out. It can drive anaerobic conditions up into your leach field, and we want to prevent that. Right, and so as bacteria are doing their thing out in the leach field, they're cleaning your water, and that's great. They do have a tendency, right, to die off. And if you're putting too much nutrients out there, when they die off, that they create a biomat. And if that biomat becomes too thick, the water can't get through and percolate down. And so instead it starts to back up and hits the surface. And this is what's known as a failed leach field, right? You are putting too much nutrients out there, and your water now can't leave the leach field. And so now we have to come up with a new solution. All right, so before I get to designing wastewater, I'm gonna see what the questions were for how wastewater systems work. Is it safe to use toilet bowl cleaner that contains hydrogen peroxide? Ooh, good question. Very conflicting information. You want to say hi? There you go. Say hi. Hi. So this is actually a really good question. I sort of say it's sort of my philosophy, right? When he tries to drink the bathwater. Everybody loves your singing voice. Okay. Go hang out with Daddy. No. Right. The solution to pollution is dilution.
Some crow.
Right, so, you know, right when he drinks the bath water and there's some soap in it and, you know, whatever was on his body, I'm putting it into a large pot of water. Hydrogen peroxide tends to break down and react and sort of become benign over time with water. So if you're keeping it diluted enough, it shouldn't be a problem. If you are not putting out a lot of water, right? If you don't, if someone's not showering every day and that, right, and you're not running the dishwasher and you're not running the wash machine, and there's not water really going out very much out to your leach field and your septic tank, cleaners like hydrogen peroxide can, and if you're cleaning frequently, they can accumulate and cause a problem. But as long as there's enough of a dilution factor, it should be okay. How does one check sludge levels? Excellent question. So you take the top off of your septic tank. I have a stick that's marked every 6 inches. And it's kind of like when you check your oil, right? You dipstick it down all the way to the bottom of the tank, and you can actually see when you pull it back up, the sludge tends to drip a bit, but you'll end up with sort of a greasy layer at the top, and you'll end up with a bottom layer that will turn like black, right? And that'll tell you how much sludge and scum have accumulated. You want to keep the sludge layer below 3 feet. If it goes above 3 feet, typically that means it's going to start blocking your effluent exit pipe. And we don't want that, right? Because that's going to cause some problems. So I typically try to keep it below 2, right? And that Like I said, if you have a healthy, robust septic tank, it can take about 10 years, 15 years, and in some cases to build up a 2-foot layer. What's the difference between a leach field and a drain field? There's not really a difference. It depends on what state you and I just keep going back and forth today because I had a 3-hour webinar with the EPA for all of New England. And some states call it a drain field and some states call it a leach field. We tend to call it a leach field, but it's an interchangeable term. All right, was there any other questions before I move on to how we design wastewater systems? All right, not seeing anybody's hands go up, I'll keep going. So designing wastewater systems starts with digging test pits because we need to know what kind of soils you have on your property. We also need to know the separation between those good soils and seasonal high water, because that's going to dictate what kind of a leach field we can put out there. Right, and so we go out there and we do design tests. We dig test pits. I tell landowners all the time, right, because we have to make sure there's that 4 feet of separation to ledge when you're already talking a couple feet into the ground for your actual system. No one wants to hand dig a couple, 5 to 7 foot pits. It is much easier when you bring out the excavator. I know landowners don't like it when they see the heavy equipment coming, but nobody wants to be out there digging that much. And for an in-ground system, we require a minimum of 2 test pits. For a mound system, we're going to require a minimum of 3 test pits. And so, right, we're looking for where those we're looking for where there's microbes live. Right, and microbes, right, again, we want the aerobic ones, so we want oxygen. Oxygen gets indicated by rust, right? So we're looking for where iron has oxidized in the soil, right? So we're looking for this red-brown color. That means we have good oxygen exchange with the surface. The first thing I always get is, what if I just don't have iron in my yard? So it turns out iron is everywhere. It's constantly raining down on a geologic time scale. It's constantly raining down from space, right? And so if you're a geology nerd like I am, right, and you take a magnet with you to the beach and you run it through the beach sand, and I just say the beach because it's right, that tends to be nice and dry when the actual minerals don't stick to your magnet. And what's left on the magnet are iron filings, and about 90% of those iron filings are going to be cosmogenic in origin, right? They have rained down from space, and they're raining down across the surface of the earth, right? And over geologic timescales, it's enough that soil, as long as it hasn't been leached of the iron, soils around the planet will be red. Right, so this gray soil, once it starts to turn gray, indicates that the iron's actually been dissolved and washed out. And that's when we know that we've had seasonal high water there, right? That water comes up and hangs out there frequently enough that it's actually taken the iron away from the soil. Right, and so we would say that seasonal high water, right, is right where sort of that transition happens. We've got water coming up to about there. The other thing that we're going to look at when we look at test pits is grain size, right? Because sands allow water to percolate away quickly. In fact, they allow water to percolate away too quickly, right? So when I was on my webinar this morning with the EPA, right, we had southern New England complaining about all of their problems with nutrients getting into their groundwater, and it's because the water leaves the system so fast that none of the aerobic bacteria really have a chance to do anything, right? Think of pouring water onto beach sand and it disappears fairly quickly. That's their problem. Here in Vermont, we are actually kind of lucky for the most part, especially on this side of the state, where we have a nice mixture of the finer sands, right? The silts and the clays that are going to help hold the water there for a while, right? We want to hold it there for a while. We want it to eventually dissipate, but we'd like for it to hang out for a bit, right? And so we have that nice, what we call loam material, which is a nice mixture of everything, right? This is sort of like the ideal gardening soil. It's not going to let the water go too quickly, but it's not going to let the water sit there too long. Over on Lake Champlain, they actually have the problem of having too much fines. So they have too much clay in their soil. In fact, there's parts over there that you can actually dig up a yard and you could make pots out of what's in the backyard, right? And that clay is a platey material. So it's super fine, it's platey, so it tends to just stack, just like pancakes, right? And it doesn't let the water go through at all. This is why you can, line a koi pond with clay, is because it's actually going to hold the water there, just like a swimming pool. And so that's then becomes a problem where we need to get something in there that's going to allow the water to dissipate. This side of the state, we tend to have that nice mix where soils are going to hold some water, allow the treatment to happen, but will eventually allow the water to dissipate. Then a designer is going to ask the landowner, how much wastewater are we going to produce in this house? And they use the calculation of design flow of 70 gallons per day. Right, and it's not, hey, I'm buying a 3-bedroom house, but I'm going to live here by myself, right? And so I only need a wastewater system for 70 gallons. We're going to insist that it be built for the number of bedrooms. So it's for the potential of that house. So we say that there's a minimum of 2 bedrooms for a house, just because everybody turns into a carpenter at some point and adds a guest bedroom. And we say that there are 2 people in the first 3 bedrooms in a house. Beyond that, those 3 bedrooms, there can be 1 person per bedroom in the calculation, right? So if you have a 4-bedroom house, you can say that there's 2 people for the first 3 and 1 person in that 4th. Right, and so for a 5-bedroom house, when we do the math out, right, it's about 560 gallons per day of water flow. I always tell people that's a minimum, right? So in this case, right, for this 5-bedroom house, they're saying 2 people for the first 3, so 6 plus 1 in each of the other ones for an additional 2, and that's 8 people. If you're going to plan on Airbnb-ing this house, right, or renting this house out, technically you can only rent it for 8 people, right? Because that is what your wastewater and your water supply has been built for. If you plan, right, if you know ahead of time that, hey, I'm going to rent this Airbnb it for 16, right, and I'm going to put bunk beds in one of these rooms, and right, this happens a lot in the ski areas. I tell people, be upfront about that. We can design you a system for 16 people, even though it's only a 5-bedroom house, right? The designer, tell your designer that they will build that, they will design that system, we will build that system. And that way you can actually market that house for holding that many people, right? But when you don't, you're actually jeopardizing, right? If you start advertising for 16 and yours is only built for 6, you're starting to jeopardize your leach field and your water supply. And we want to avoid that, right? Because then we're coming in as to protect human health and the environment. So if everybody's honest up front, this is what we're going to do with this property, we can design for that. Some people say there's no way I use 70 gallons of water per day. And I will tell you, probably, right, there's a little bit of a factor of safety built in. The average person is not going to use 70 gallons of water per day. Right, if you have the low flow fixtures on your sinks and your toilets and your showers, you have a water efficient dishwasher and wash machine, you probably won't reach the 70 gallons per day. But again, we're anticipating worst case scenario here, right? Because we want you to have a healthy system. So there is a bit of a factor safety built in. And I always tell people, if you have a teenager in the house, right? I've got a teenager in the house. And suddenly showers last 45 minutes to an hour, they are using the 70 gallons of water per day, right? They're using a little bit of my 70 gallons of water per day, right? And so we are factoring that in, right? We are saying, okay, this could be potentially a house where, you know, mom, dad, a couple of teenagers, that's the system we're going to build for, right? And people will say, hey, but this is my retirement home. And I say, great. The next person who buys it, though, may move in with their whole family. And so we need that system to work for them. All right, and so once they sort of get all of that information, right, we know what the soils are, we know what the water flow is, they can then start looking at the property, sort of what the constraints are size-wise, and start designing the system. The most traditional and the easiest to install is known as a trench. It's a narrow single pipe. There can actually be multiple trenches lined up, sort of finger-like. Right, and it's going to follow all of the guidelines that we talked about, that 3 feet of separation is seasonal high water. It's going to be within the first 3 feet of the soil, of the surface. The second easiest are beds. Right, and so they're very similar to a trench. It's just that they go out, they spread out, they're a little bit wider. And the benefit of a bed is they're also shorter because we're taking up some of the square footage that we need in the width, as opposed to putting it all on the length. So we can have trenches and beds, and they can be in ground. These are when you have nice deep ledge, nice deep seasonal high water. Your soils are looking good. You can do a nice in-ground system. These are easy breezy. And they work indefinitely. The next one are at-grade systems, right? So this is, we just scrape off really the bio layer, right? So where you sort of grass and grass roots, that gets taken away. And then you're gonna lay either your trench or your bed right there on the ground, right? First your stone, then your perforated pipe. And then you're gonna cover it all up. This ends up creating, while we call them an at-grade system, it's really a low profile mound. Then we have the mounds, right? This is when we have high seasonal high water or high ledge, right? And we need to build the separation in, right? We have to bring in some soils that are gonna allow the water to percolate down and get treated before they're gonna hit that ledge and groundwater. And so these can be, we've put in systems where it's the full 3 feet of separation, right? Over by Lake Champlain, some of them have seasonal high water at 2 inches, right? That means we're coming in with 3 feet of sand and then the system on top of that 3 feet of sand, and then you cover the whole thing over. So these can get quite large. Bottomless sand filters, I like to call them a mound in a box, right? This is when you don't have the room for the sides of the mound to go out, right? If you're on a very small lot and we need to sort of contain it and we're not going onto the neighbor's property, right? We can put a mound inside a box. They're typically built out of either pressure treated lumber or the newest fad right now is to build them out of concrete, right? And those are gonna hold everything that you would otherwise see in a mound, right? It's gonna have that separation built into the mound, and then it's gonna have the layers. These are not gardens, right? I see this all the time. People start gardening in these. Yes, they are irrigated land, and You could probably put, you know, some of your more herby stuff, but you don't want things with roots that are going to get into those perforated pipes and start blocking your system, right? So if you're talking herbs where you're going to have nice shallow roots, you could probably get away with it. When you start putting in, I saw one recently where they had planted rose bushes, right? Rose bushes have nice, deep, thick. If you've ever tried to pull out a rose bush, they're really hard to get out, right? Because they get some serious root systems, and those root systems look for water, right? So they go up inside the pipes and start causing clogs, right? So you do not want to put big plants in there. Even tomato plants, right? They get really fibrous roots that will get up and clog your pipes, and you don't want that. And then the final profile is drip systems, which are kind of cool. You're again just really taking off those surface soils, and then it's almost like putting an irrigation system out. It's very similar to just regular garden hose that someone has punctured like every inch with a needle puncture. And you run it out over a large area. You can snake it around trees, you can snake it around landscaping, and it almost just irrigates your lawn. I kind of like these. I don't think this gets used enough. You do have the risk. Again, you have to maintain your lawn really well, so you're not allowing, you know, trees or bushes to come in, because again, that's going to easily clog the system. Really, you shouldn't be driving on any of these systems, but you really can't drive on a drip system because it's going to collapse that tube fairly easily. But if you're just going to use your lawn like a nice lawn, right, you're going to keep it mowed, it's a really nice solution so that you can avoid some of the mound profiles if that's what you're looking for. All right, so before I go into IAs, I'm going to see if there's some more questions. All right, so for a 2-bedroom house, what is the length of trenches? Excellent question. It sort of is going to depend. So a 2-bedroom house, right, that's going to be 280 gallons per day. And then it's going to depend on your soils and what they can absorb. So if you're talking super nice soils, our best soils can take 1.5 gallons per day per square foot. Right, and so you're typically then looking at, for a 2-bedroom house, the trenches are 4 feet wide, typically 3 to 4 feet. You're probably looking at, you could probably get away with about a 30-foot trench. When you're starting to look at some of the less nice soils, right, when you start going into like the clays, when things get clay heavy, you can go down to half a gallon per square foot, in which case you're now talking, even for a 2-bedroom home, right? So 280 times 2, so 560 divided by the 4. So you're talking 140 feet of trench. So you really do benefit with the better soils, because things start to get a little crazy the closer you get to clay, which is really the holdup, unfortunately. Will this PowerPoint be available afterwards? I can make this PowerPoint into a PDF, and I can give it to Corey to then distribute to all the participants. All right. Any questions before I move on to IAs? I know it's a lot of information, so this is, if you have the question a little bit later on, no problem. All right, so innovative and alternative systems. Innovative alternative systems tend to fall into 2 categories. They're either the treatment systems or the dispersal systems. So dispersal systems are typically large chambered. They promote oxygen exchange, and they're replacing the stone and pipe. So they're very useful in places where it's otherwise difficult to get a truckload of stone. And this is very true in Vermont, where we've got some very steep slopes. And And if you're trying to get a truck full of stone out to a place where there's some landscaping issues, right, some ledge problems, these can get carried in. I like to call sort of these guys the Quonset huts, because they're just like half of a large pipe that someone has cut down. There's perforations all along them for oxygen exchange. Right, and they're going to let the water dissipate out, oxygen in. These are Presby pipes. Presby pipes were actually invented and are still manufactured over in New Hampshire. So this is sort of a local product. It's very popular in Vermont. And it's just a pipe with perforations all around. It then gets surrounded by this sort of grassy mat, which is supposed to promote bacterial growth. And again, it's just in place of pipe and stone. Treatment systems are a little different. These guys, I tell people, are like buying a car. So there's a lot of different systems, and they range in price. It's like buying a Ford Pinto up to a Mercedes-Benz, right? Depending on which one you want to go with. They start at about $3,000 and they can go up to about $45,000, $50,000. And they come after the septic tank, but before water hits the leach field. And what they're going to do is they're going to provide aerobic treatment, right? So they're going to have that bacteria break down the nutrients in the water. And what leaves them is almost clean water, right? That just needs a little bit of polishing out in the leach field. The reason why you might want to put one of these in is because not a lot of treatment is going to need to happen out in the leach field. We allow a 50% reduction in the size of your leach field. We also allow a 50% reduction in the separation between the bottom of your leach field and seasonal and high water, right? So one, we definitely need these to be working, right? Because if they're not working, you're putting out full strength to now a very small leach field and that doesn't have the normal separation we'd require. That becomes a risk for both pathogens and nutrients. And so these systems do need to be maintained. You're required to have a service provider come out and do maintenance, just like you're required to have someone look at your car once a year and give you an inspection sticker. And typically when they do that, they're going to do an oil change. The same thing is true for these guys. Somebody's going to come out, they're going to look at your system, they're going to tell us about your system, they're going to tell us that if it's functioning, and there's typically some, fuse that needs to be replaced or a filter that needs to be replaced. So there's regular ongoing maintenance with these. Right, and so you're gonna inject oxygen in some way into the system to allow the bacteria to do their work. Right, so this Norweco, for example, there's an aerator that swirls bubbles around so that the bacteria can have happy little bubbles. Right, some of them, they have a media in them for the bacteria to adhere to. They inject oxygen down to feed that bacteria. Some of them, the media actually stays above where water collects, right? And so it gets sprayed through this media, it trickles down, and then the clean water gets collected at the bottom. Some of them are trickled down through organic material. The organic material tends to be either peat or coconut fiber are the most popular right now. Right, and this works in the same way that it trickles out, goes through the coconut fiber or the peat, and then the bacteria is adhering to that coconut fiber and peat, right? It cleans the water as it goes through and you have cleaner water that collects at the bottom. So where can you learn more about IA systems? We upkeep a website. Come on. And this website has a lot of information on it. It not only tells you all of the different technologies, and you can see just how many technologies we have approved, right? We've got quite a few here. And we have more coming in every year. So it tells you the technology, tells you when their approval expired. If you have a personal permit that references one of these technologies, even if the technology expires on this website, you can still install it. The only thing we can't do when the technology expires is we can't issue a new permit for it on a piece of property. Right, it's going to tell you if we know who distributes the technology, it'll tell you the distributors. It also will tell you who the service providers for that technology are, and where you can go to for more information. Right, and like I said, about every 3 to 4 months, we end up proving a couple new technologies that get added to this list. So this is an ever-growing list. Oh, 2 new messages. Perfect timing, because we're about to move on to part 2. Does the content of public rental advertisements need to be in line with what has permitted for the septic system of the rental properties? If it does, the owner's advertisements for the septic system allowance verified, confirmed by the advertising organization or maybe the town. So this is a good question. I do not have the manpower, right? I have a very small team. I wish it was bigger. We don't have the manpower to hunt these out, right? I am not actively searching Airbnb. I will tell you though, the way we find out is either neighbors report it, or town officials report that they've got a house that they have on the record as being 3 bedrooms and is advertising for 16. Is that allowed? And I have to go check the permit, and we'll have to say, nope, they're only permitted for 6. And then I have to send a letter to the landowner saying, hey, we've just got a report that you're advertising on whatever platform for 16, you're only allowed for 6. That letter goes in public records. It becomes part of something that's a title search. And there's now a cloud on your record, a cloud on your title. It also then allows the towns, because a copy will be sent to the towns, and it allows the towns to pursue it however they choose to. So I'm not checking, but I tell people all the time, I promise you, somebody is going to be checking if parties start happening at your house. Under what conditions are dry wells replaced by leach fields? So that's a good question. Dry wells are not allowed to be installed in Vermont anymore, right? It was questionable technology, right? These are holes that go well below the aerobic zone into the anaerobic zone. You're basically releasing full strength wastewater into your groundwater. They tend to build up various biomats really quickly. Although depending on how deep they originally were, they can last for decades. At some point, a dry well fails. And we call a failure in Vermont, either it's backing up into the home, or it's surfacing, or it's reaching surface water, right? So that's going to be more of your straight pipes. If it's backing up into the home or surfacing, which is what's going to happen with a dry well eventually, we then require you to replace it with a leach field. Right, I do get phone calls probably once a month. Can I just replace my dry well with another dry well? No. We're going to make you replace it with a leach field, but we do let you keep it until it has failed. Right, we don't require replacements until a system has actually failed. Okay. All right, the wastewater system and potable water supply rules. So we'll look at the scope and purpose, municipal delegation, designer licensing, and permits, site-specific permits for wastewater and water supplies. And then how we approve innovative alternative systems. So again, the scope of the rules is we're looking at systems that are designed for less than 6,500 gallons per day, and then municipal connections to water and sewer. All right, you can now see 6,500 gallons per day, right? It's going to take you a couple of single family homes connecting together to get above that 6,500. So most of the systems in Vermont fall to us. Right, this is, we issue rulings and permits for construction, modification, or replacements of buildings, structures, campgrounds, associated wastewater systems, and potable water supplies. I hear all the time, I want to put in a simple campground. I'm not going to offer water and wastewater. Okay, is my answer. Right, but people are going to get water from somewhere, and people are going to go to the bathroom somewhere. And I'd rather know where that's happening than have them just do it anywhere. So if you're going to have a campground, and this is becoming a bigger issue in Vermont, there's a number of companies that have started to reach out to Vermonters to turn your land into a campground. You can't do that without a water and wastewater system, right? You have to provide those to people who are coming to your property. Right, and so again, the purpose of these rules is to protect human health and the environment. Right, people will say, you're just doing this to get my fee. I promise you, your fee does not cover the amount of time and scope that we put in to reviewing these permits. In fact, our fees haven't increased in about a decade. And even then, they didn't cover our costs. Right, we do this solely to protect human health and the environment. Right, we're going to regulate design, construction, modification, and operation and maintenance of wastewater systems, increase accountability for designers and installers. Right, we're the ones who keep them honest. Ensure owners know their responsibilities and have knowledge of their system's design, operation, and maintenance. Right, my goal is never to punish people. When I send out letters saying, hey, we didn't get your IA inspection last year, and people will call and say, I didn't know I had one. Great, that starts a conversation. And our goal is to then get you on board as opposed to punish you. Right, and establish performance criteria. And the absolute base of our performance criteria is that wastewater is not exposed to air or backing up in buildings. No direct discharge to surface waters, and does not contaminate potable water supplies. I have the argument frequently of people, well, it's just in my backyard, right? It's okay, it's backing up and it's reaching the surface, but it's just in my backyard. Why do you care? Because the neighbor's dog is going to get into your backyard. It may get into that water, and it takes that water back home to your neighbor. And I can't be sure that water is not containing a pathogen. Right? So as soon as that water has reached the surface, we have an issue that needs to get addressed. Because I don't know where that water and those pathogens are going to travel to if it's not being dealt with correctly. And we like to encourage innovation and flexibility in design, right? We actually have some of the more relaxed rules. Some of the other New England states, for example, require you to have, for new technology, they require it to have been tested somewhere else with a similar climate. We actually have an experimental permit where I will allow a one-off, right? You have a brand new piece of technology, you have no idea if it works, but the science is there. We will let you install one. We're going to monitor it closely, but we let people innovate here. Right, and so we're also making sure that the designers who are coming to help you design your systems are licensed and have a level of knowledge. Right, so class 1 designer licenses are professional engineers, right? They have to have an engineering degree with an engineering permit for the state of Vermont. They're also required to have what's known as A&R soil specialization, which they've demonstrated to us that they understand all of that soil stuff, that they understand the soil characteristics required to build a wastewater system. So class 1 is the top. Then we have a class A, which is at the bottom of our sort of designer list. Class A's can design in-ground and at-grade systems. Okay, so these are simple, some of those easy breezy, the soils are great, the water is low, easy systems to design. Class B can do in-ground, at-grade, mounds, bottomless sand filters, and with or without IA technology, right? So this is a step up from a class A. And then we have BWs who have the same authorization as a class B, but can design a water supply that serves more than one structure. Right, so this is if one well is going to service 2 neighbors. I tell people I would start with a class A, right? If I'm a homeowner, I'm going to start with a class A and work my way up, because typically the costs on the landowner increase the higher you get on the scale, right? I have a lot of people who jump right to a professional engineer, and that's great if you need one. If not, you've just paid a lot for a system that you probably didn't need to pay. And a class A will tell you, they'll come out usually doing free site inspection for you and say, look, this is above me, you need a class B, BW, or a class 1. And they will pass that off to one of the people that can design for you. So finding a designer, you can go to the Office of Professional Regulation, which is at the Secretary of State. You go to the Secretary of State's website. They administer applications, renewals, complaints, and disciplinary action. You can also bring any of those to me, right? Disciplinary things that may result in disciplinary action, and then I coordinate with the Office of Professional Regulation. But they're the ones with the investigators and the man hours to actually investigate any outstanding complaints. We also, on our site, have an unofficial list. I will tell you, I only pull from the Secretary of State's website once a year, right? So renewals are required to happen on February 1st. And so sometime in February, I usually go into the Secretary of State's page and I pull the most recent list and we post it on our website. But I don't have the manpower to, every time somebody retires or a PE comes in and sets up shop in July, I don't have the power to keep adding those. So mine are not always up to date, but the Secretary of State's website is. We set and provide the exams for all of these. So earlier in May, I did a Class A exam. Later this month, I'm then giving the soil exam to anybody who passed that written exam. Later in July, we'll be doing a Class B exam. And then sometime in October, we'll be doing the BW. I have a number of engineers who need their soil compliance who will be taking the soil exam this month. And then I also am the one who requires continuing education. So they're required to take 12 credits of continuing ed every 2 years so that they're keeping up in the field. And I designate what is available for continuing ed and how much that is worth. Because we want, right, we want the best technology out there. We want people who are informed and taking this seriously. All right, so your designer comes out, right? They've dug their test pits. They've talked to you about what kind of house you want, right? They're going to submit to us detailed plans. And on these detailed plans, they're going to tell us, again, your design flow, and they're going to tell us what the soil is like. And then they're going to design that system, right? So in this one, you can see, right, we've got the well here. We've got a house. We've got a septic tank. Looks like a pump station. And then the line that's going to run out, and this is a single trench in a mound. Right, and around these we have also, right, so this is the isolation zone for the well. And this is the isolation zone for the wastewater system, the leach field. No well can be in the isolation zone for the leach field. No leach field can be in the isolation zone of a well, right? These are built, so it's a shorter distance for wells downhill, right? So this would be downslope. It's going to be a bigger distance upslope, right? Because water is going to flow downhill to that well. The opposite is true for wastewater systems, where the smaller distance is going to be upslope and the bigger distance is going to be downslope. Right? And these are designed so that there is a minimum of 2 years that water would have to travel through groundwater to get from your wastewater system to your well. Because study after study shows that with a very nice factor of safety, within 2 years, you will have eliminated, it's like 1 in a billion chance of a pathogen getting through in a 2-year time of travel. Right, so we are ensuring that there is a nice factor of safety before any water that was ever released in your wastewater system is going to get near any well around it. Right, so these plans and detailed drawings, they'll have, they'll show us where water features are, floodplains, if there's going to be retaining walls, any existing or approved wells in the area, including your neighbors, easements, right? We require a setback from your neighbor's property line for any of these so that you have the ability to maintain it. If you're a small piece of property where you're going to have to, where that distance can't be met, we'll require an easement from your neighbor so that you can maintain it. It's also going to provide construction details, right? Someone can take the plans that we approve. We make sure that there's enough details on it so that a installer can take those plans and build that system. So I know it's kind of hard, but one of the things we put on landowners in the permit, because you're the only one we can really put it on, is that you're required to make sure that a project is completed as shown in those plans that we've approved. Right, and so I tell landowners, there's going to be a point where you're going to have to hire a designer to come back and certify that what's in the ground meets the design, right? And that certification goes on file with us as well as the town. If something went in that doesn't meet the plans and the designer says, look, I can't sign off on it, homeowners are the ones that have been harmed, right? This is part of that legal loophole that the lawyers insist on, that you guys can then, as homeowners, because you've been harmed, pursue legal action against the installer, right? Which is why we put the onus on you, because you're the ones with the legal ramifications to insist that installer correct any mistakes in installation. Permits run with the land. This is both a positive and a negative for landowners, right? So you could come in today for an undeveloped piece of property that you own and get a design permitted. And that design will stay valid indefinitely, right? You could sell that property 20 years from now, it gets developed. If they're designing that exact system that we permitted today, they're okay. Permits run with the land. They do not expire ever. They are enforceable though against landowners successors, right? So if you come to us and you wanted an innovative alternative technology, we approved that. That's what you installed. Innovative alternative technologies come with annual requirements for inspection. They not only, that requirement passes with the land, right? So if somebody buys that property from you in 5 years, the next people who own it are still required to have that piece of property inspected, that's IA system inspected every year, right? So ongoing requirements run with the land, as well as, and I tell people all the time, if you have an undeveloped piece of technology, the first thing I would do would be to get a permit for it. You don't have to build it now. You don't have to build it tomorrow. You don't have to build it for 50 years, but I would definitely get a permit on it because it's going to guarantee you can eventually build on it. It's your responsibility as the landowner to record the permit with the town records within 30 days. It says it on the permit. I will tell you, this is the one part of the permit that is impossible for us to enforce, right? There's no way for me to know that it's in 30 days. It almost always happens that when we hear about it, it's at the time of sale, right? And the title lawyer discovers that it was never put in the town records. And then people are struggling. They're coming to us and saying, can I get a copy so that I can put it in the town records and make my title lawyer happy? So I always encourage people to make sure, right, when we send you a copy that's nicely stamped, it says record documents for recording, you've got them right then, put them right in the town record and you can forget about it. Because otherwise it's going to become a bit of a scramble when you go to sell that property. A permit is not considered validated and completed until we get that installation certification from a designer, right? That says that the system went in as we designed, as we approved it. It's only valid for the description, as long as the description of the land stays the same, right? This is true. So I will say, like Irene messed up some people's permits, right? Because suddenly rivers changed drastically and river banks changed drastically. And where you might have had a permitted wastewater system that got permitted back in the 90s, and that's now 5 feet to the riverbank, right? Conditions have changed to the point where that is no longer a valid permit. So as long as the conditions on the land don't change, you're okay. We require that anybody purchasing the land, if there's an IA technology on it, that they're shown both the permit and the approval. You're also allowing a state representative to access the property to ascertain if that wastewater and water system are meeting our requirements. This comes up, right? You have a WW permit, which is what we call our permits, right? You have one on your property that says we can access it, and your neighbor calls, because I get this frequently. Your neighbor calls and says, there's a smell coming from my neighbor's property, right? We are legally allowed to then access your property to ascertain where that smell is coming from and if it's coming from your wastewater system. The wastewater system shall be operated to prevent surface discharge, and water supply shall be operated to prevent its contamination. Right, it's the landowner's property to not do things that are going to screw their systems up. We recently had somebody who apparently had a rather large dog, right, and was piling their dog's waste up against their well cap. And sure enough, went to go sell the property. The new owners insisted, the new prospective buyers insisted that the water get tested. Right, and it popped for a lot of things, and basically became a failed system. And it was due to the fact that they were putting their dog's waste basically right on top of their well. Right, and it's then they tried to say, well, you permitted the well. We said, right, yes, but the landowner is responsible for maintaining. right? You don't want to be putting things, you don't want to release your pool water over your well. You don't want to release your pool water over your wastewater system. You don't want to be piling manure on top of either. You don't want to park your cars on top of either, right? Those are your responsibilities. Once these systems are in and they're verified, it's the landowner's responsibility to maintain them. All right. See what we have. Thought I saw a question pop. When a permit is granted for a wastewater system, does direct site certification observation take place in all towns and municipalities in Vermont under all circumstances? If so, who does the certification and are they licensed? Do they certify this in writing? So yes, any system that goes in, well or wastewater system, is required to be certified. They're required to be certified by either a licensed designer, so whoever you had design the system in the first place is a legitimate person who can sign off on it. Wells can be signed off by licensed installers of wells, right? If they have a licensed well driller, and we do that for replacement systems because we want you to have a replacement system for your well as quickly as possible. So they don't necessarily require a designer to be involved. Well drillers can do that on their own, but they are also licensed. And they do it in writing. It is an electronic form that gets submitted to us, and it has to have either their legal signature or their legal electronic signature. It then goes on file with us, and all of our documents are public. You can easily search for them online. Right, so if something is wrong, you have somebody to fall back on, right? That's part of that legal loophole. So the IA requirements, you're required to comply with your permit. You're required to get inspected and certified by a licensed designer. The big thing is you're required to have maintenance and inspections performed by an authorized service provider. The fact that your brother-in-law is a mechanical engineer and you feel he can look at it is not okay with us. Right? That's a very slippery slope that we're not going down. But I get that call frequently, right? My neighbor is a whatever, or my brother-in-law, or okay. We have people we have certification that they were trained on that system. They're the ones that are required to come do the maintenance and inspections. The benefit to this especially is that they are also required to have a relationship with the technology, that they can get any replacement part to you within 24 hours. So if there's anything wrong with your system, they can get the part to fix it within 24 hours. Right, and that is part of the IA approval, that they have to meet that standard. Service providers then submit the reports to us. They're required to give a copy to you. They also typically give a copy to the technology. You're required to operate and maintain as per the manual and report any problems to the service provider. This is a big one. We have a lot of people who own seasonal homes in Vermont who have a tendency to unplug their systems and then forget to turn them back on when they come back in the spring, right? And so you've been putting out full strength wastewater now until you get the service provider there who realizes that it's unplugged, right? That will get reported to us and we will follow up. And it becomes a cloud on title until you can verify that that's no longer the condition. I've also had people, if an alarm starts going off, right, that indicates that there's something wrong with the system. I've had people put duct tape over the visual alarm. We've also had people cut the line to the speakers so that you can't hear the auditory alarm. It is, if there's an alarm going off, right, it's just kind of like that check engine light. you sort of ignore it at your own peril. And usually the cost of repair goes up the longer you ignore it. Right? So you really, when the alarm goes off, the best thing to do is to reach out to your service provider. Right? And if a technology fails, or we keep having reports after report after report of somebody unplugging it, and we issue that letter that says, hey, we've now had the third report of you unplugging your system, it becomes a cloud on title, and it becomes difficult to sell the property until you've resolved the cloud. All right, so I've been doing a lot of talking, so we're going to take a minute and see how much we've absorbed a little. So what are the challenges for installing a wastewater system on a lakeshore lot? And you can go into the reactions and raise your hands, or you can type your ideas right in the chat. Anybody? All right, I'm going to keep going. You can contaminate the lake. Yes. Small lots, high water levels, home density. Yes. No room for the leach field, drain field, distance to the lake, high water, close by wells. All excellent answers. All right. Sometimes I get a little nervous on these that, you know, I'm talking to just air. So thank you. Health issues with humans and pets using the lake. Absolutely. Coliforms, cyanobacteria. Yes. Yeah. When you own a sort of a lakeside piece of property, you're taking on a lot of responsibility. And there are all of those issues, right? We've got the small lots, the high density, short-term, high occupancy, trees, roots, shallow water table, thin soils, close to the lake, groundwater levels, all these problems, right? So the potential solution for lakeshore is almost always some sort of pretreatment unit, so that we're cleaning the water as much as possible before it reaches the leach field. And then almost always it's going to be a bottomless sand filter, right, which is going to allow you to get the biggest bang in the smallest space. But it is, right? And people are like, well, you know, I didn't have this 50 years ago. Why do I need to put it in now that my system has failed? Because we now know, right? That's been 50 years of nutrients and pathogens getting into the lakes. And as more and more people start to use our lakes, that becomes a bigger and bigger problem, right? This is why we're having those cyanobacteria blooms, why we're having coliform, right? Right, it's leading, it sort of wasn't aware of it, right? But it was leading to when kids were getting summer earaches and, right, upset stomachs. A lot of it headed back to how we were treating our lakes, and we now know better. And so we insist on doing better. All right, so preventative maintenance. We'll look at when a wastewater system has failed and what to do. The on-site loan program. What to do with your private well. So a wastewater system has failed when it's exposed to the ground. Jump around a bit. When it's discharged to surface water, right? So these are the straight pipes. We've corrected, I'm going to say probably most of the straight pipes in Vermont. It used to be a common practice in Vermont, where almost anybody who had a piece of property that was near a stream, river, or lake straight piped their septic tank or dry well right to that body of water. Vermont has been very active for the last 40 years trying to find all of these straight pipes and getting them replaced with legitimate wastewater systems. I will say we probably still find about one a year now. So they are still out there, and you are free to report if you ever come across one. And you can do so anonymously. If you go to our enforcement website, there's an anonymous online form. Backing up into the building. Some of these failures can actually qualify for a minor repair. Every now and then, right, it's going to be because a root got into your leach field or your D box, or your septic tank just needs to get pumped out, or somebody drove over a line and crushed a pipe, and we just need to replace that one pipe. Your designer is going to hopefully figure that out before you put in a whole new system, right? They're going to come out, they're going to investigate everything. If they find any of those issues, you don't need to come to us, right? The designer can say, okay, we can go ahead and fix whatever that small issue is. Anything that goes beyond that is going to require a new system, and it's going to require a permit from us. Right, so some of the signs you might see as a landowner is wastewater backing up into your toilets, tubs, or sinks, right? Nobody wants that. Especially this tends to happen at the worst possible time, right? This is Thanksgiving dinner problem, right? The 4th of July picnic problem, right? So knowing what your system looks like and sort of the health of your system is always a good idea so that you can avoid those, worst case scenarios. But we do get some of the biggest reports of failure right after Thanksgiving. Slow draining fixtures, especially following a weather event, right? If your sink's not draining, and we just had a major storm, that can indicate that there's nowhere for that water to go, which is a sign of a failed system or about to fail system. The smell of sewage, particularly when accompanied by soggy ground, water discharging over the ground or into a nearby ditch, even if the discharge isn't constant, right? This tends to be when we hear about it from the neighbors, and the neighbor's going to call and say, there's a smell coming from next door. And then a flashing light or beeping alarm, which can indicate either an IA system has something wrong with it or that a pump is not working, and it's causing a system to fail. Right? So you do not want Thanksgiving Day disasters. So a wastewater system is not failed if it can be remedied by a minor repair or replacement, right? So if you can replace that pipe. You can also replace a septic tank. Sometimes a septic tank cracks and you can replace the tank. Again, you cannot replace a dry well, but you can replace a septic tank. It's also not failed if the effects last for a brief period of time and the system recovers on its own, and that the cause of that failure was an unusual and non-recurring event, right? This is when some systems get a little flooded during a hurricane, things start to slow down. When the hurricane passes and the flooding event passes, if everything returns to normal, we don't consider it a failed system. How to prevent a wastewater system from failing. Conserve water, particularly during a major weather event. Repair or replace leaking plumbing fixtures, right? A dripping faucet that drips once a minute puts an extra 5 gallons into your system every day, right? So over time, depending on the number of fixtures you have, this is adding a considerable burden to your system. Maintain proper landscaping around your system, right? This is going back to the trees, the bushes, anything with serious fibrous roots can actually disrupt and break your system. Pump your septic tank regularly, right? So you can either monitor it like I do, or just take the 3-4 year cycle and do it then. limit what goes into your system. The biggest thing we're seeing right now are the so-called flushable wipes that are causing failed systems, right? They're allowed to use the term right now flushable because they will make it through your toilet. They will not do anything good for your whole wastewater system. The only thing they will do is make it through your toilet. And then they cause major backups in various areas. They do not break down your septic tank. If you're connected to municipal, they easily start clogging municipal parts and pumps. They are a nightmare for systems, and they're part of why we're seeing an increase in failures in the last year. Do not drive or build on any part of your system. We recently had one that failed because somebody built a workshop out over their leach field. Right? Know where your leach field is. No building should ever go on it. Right? Your pool shouldn't go on it. Your shed shouldn't go on it. You really need this to just have some nice herby or grass maintenance. And then you want to, hello. You are still naked. And then you want to inspect your system routinely, including cleaning of the effluent filter. Hey, can you go with Daddy, please? And maybe put a diaper on? Yeah, go ahead. Here you go. Right, so inspecting your system can be as easy as just walking around your yard, right? You're looking for soggy spots, you're looking for parts that aren't draining, you're looking to see if there's a smell. You're looking to see if your grass is getting a little too robust in that area. That means that the nutrients are getting a little close to the surface. Inspecting your effluent filter, right? I like to do it in the spring on a nice sunny day. If you don't have a filter, if your septic tank is old, where it predates when we had filters, your septic tank can get retrofitted with a filter. And they're really easy. You just expose that. There's usually a hatch over it. You expose the hatch. You should be wearing gloves, goggles. You pull out the filter. You take it over. You can either do it on the grass or you can do it over the other part of the septic tank. Right, on a nice sunny day, you're going to have oxygen exposure. You're going to have UV exposure. You're going to spray it down, right? Get all of the gunk that's on the outside of it off. And then you just put it right back in, seal everything back up. It's an easy 5-minute process, part of the spring cleaning, and can maintain your system for a lot longer. If you're not comfortable doing it, when they come to pump your septic tank, those guys will also be happy to clean your filter. If the wastewater system has failed, you want to contact a Vermont licensed designer to act on your behalf, right? They're going to represent you to us. You can also, of course, always call us if you have some questions. A designer is going to assess the site and submit the permit application. It is a permit violation if a failed wastewater system is not replaced by the day on the permit, right? So it's the only time we really put a date on our permits is when it's for a failed system replacement, where we're going to typically give you about 3 months of the construction season, right? So if your failure happens at right after Thanksgiving, we don't expect that system to go in the winter, right? We're going to give you June, July, and August typically, and we're going to require the system go in by the end of August. We do follow up, and if you haven't put the system in, you're going to need to get either a new permit, or if you come in just before your due date, you can get an extension. If you don't meet that, or you don't come in for a new permit, it gets turned over to enforcement, who then will take it every now and then. They take one all the way to the environmental court. In the meantime, you're going to want to fence off the area and keep people and animals away, right? You don't want the neighbor's dog going into this water. There was actually a case a couple of years ago in Massachusetts that the dog got into the neighbor's wastewater and brought it back. The dog owner then shared an ice cream cone with the dog. You know, I'm not a dog owner, so I don't understand that to begin with, but shared an ice cream cone. And the landowner ended up with a serious illness and was rushed to Boston within 24 hours of sharing that ice cream cone. And that's how they traced it back. It ended up coming from the neighbor's exposed wastewater. Don't redirect water anywhere else, right? Don't redirect it into a drainage ditch. We want that water to move as little as possible, just because we want to keep it contained. Place hay bales around the area. It's going to help keep the water in, and have your tank pumped. And you should have it pumped fairly regularly until you get the replacement system in, because a pumped septic tank will act as a holding tank essentially. And as long as you conserve water, you can get, right, a typical septic tank is going to be about 1,000 gallons. And if you conserve water well enough, that's going to get you probably a week to 2 weeks of capacity where you're not surfacing at all. So as long as you get regular pump outs, that'll at least give you some wiggle room until you can get the new system in. We do have an on-site loan program to help pay for these. I will tell you, I don't like the on-site loan program, and I am actively working to try to get a better program. Because right now the terms are, it's a $3,000 minimum. There's no maximum. You pay it back over 15 to 20 years at 3% interest with $550 in fees. And it's secured by a lien on the property. It's the eligibility that I particularly don't like, where you're required, your system has to be deemed failed by a designer. It can only be for a single family residence on a lot that you own. It has to be a year-round residence. The household income has to be less than 200% of the state median. And you have to be denied financing at least one financing entity. Which is the part that I don't like. I don't think if you know you're going to be denied by a bank, I don't think we should make you jump through that hoop before we allow you to come to our loan program. So I have actively started submitting changes. It does require the state legislatures to get on board to make the changes. So this year was not our year, where things were a little bit more focused on COVID. But I am hoping we are going to get on and in front of the legislatures for next year, so that there will hopefully be some changes and this loan program will be a little bit easier in the near future. So right now, how to apply is you obtain a permit from us, you obtain 2 construction bids, which again, I think is excessive, and you complete the pre-qualification and the application form through us. All right, so some of the routine maintenance, right? You want to determine how quickly your sludge accumulates in your tank. It should be full of water. I get this a lot, is somebody will tell me, right, well, I had to have my tank pumped because it was full of water. Your septic tank is supposed to be filled with water. That's a good septic tank. Right, we want to get the solids out. That's our concern. Have the sludge and scum pumped when it needs to be. Don't turn off the pumps, right? We've talked about all this. Do hire a licensed designer to inspect the system if you're concerned. Don't purposefully stress a system to see if it's failed. I see this all the time. People will dye test a system. When you dye test a system, right? So if you're looking at buying a house or somebody's looking at buying your house and they want to dye test your system, they put dye down the wastewater, right? So they're going to flush dye down. And then they run a day's worth of water in 1 hour. Right? So if you're a 5-bedroom house, they're going to put 560 gallons of water down your system in an hour to see if any of that dye pops up on the ground. Any system receiving a day's worth of water in an hour, even if that system was healthy, can suddenly fail. So I tell people all the time, please, right? Your system, if it's working, please don't make it not work, right? We don't want the extra work on our end. We have plenty, right? No, at no point in time should you ever be putting hundreds of gallons of water down your system in an hour. Clean that effluent filter daily. And there are videos that you can go on to, right? I found this one on YouTube that will show you how to clean that.
Here are a few steps to follow to clean your effluent filter. You should
Can you
clean
guys
your
see that?
effluent filter at least twice a year, every 6 months. An effluent filter that is badly maintained can block the exit of your pretreatment tank. This could cause problems, including backed up sewage in the house. Before starting, make sure you are appropriately dressed with long pants, long sleeve shirt, safety glasses, gloves, and boots. Generally speaking, pretreatment tanks have 2 covers. They may be buried, though in some regions, local regulations require or strongly recommend that the pretreatment tank be accessible at all times. Start by removing the covers. If they're buried, you'll have to find and dig them up before starting. After removing the covers, pull up the effluent filter that you will find in the second compartment. Before you rinse it out, make sure to stand over the first compartment. This means that any debris stuck in the effluent filter will fall to be decanted just like any other debris coming from the house. If the filter is rinsed over the second compartment, untreated debris could be sent directly to the leach field or block the effluent filter once more. While holding the filter over the first compartment of the pretreatment tank, rinse with a hose to remove all residue stuck in the filter. Some effluent filters are connected to an alarm that sounds when the filter requires cleaning. When dealing with these filters, make sure the system works correctly by lifting the float that activates the alarm. Check the openings to make sure there are no obstructions. Use the hose pressure to remove them if needed. Replace the filter firmly in its support. Make sure the arrow on the filter points to the tank exit. If needed, clean up any accidental spills around the pretreatment tank. Secure the covers back on. Change your clothes right away and clean your hands. Note the date and any other information you deem pertinent so you can refer to it later.
Right, and these are easy, right? It's not a hard process. It only takes about 5 minutes. I will also say that these risers, if you don't have them, right, and they are now required on newer tanks.
Requires cleaning.
Right, but if you don't have these sort of nice portal accesses, if your tank is like mine and it's covered, and you don't want to have to dig it up every year, these can also be retrofitted onto old tanks and make maintenance a little bit easier. Right, and this is only, I think it's about $150 job usually. Or that was the last time I priced it out, just so if I could avoid having to dig mine up every year. So it's an easy breezy thing that you can have added. I haven't done it on mine just because somebody built a patio right over mine, and it's a different color brick that tells you which one to lift up and dig underneath, and that I don't want to lose the patio. But if yours is just out in the lawn and it's an easy thing to install, I highly recommend getting the risers retrofitted. All right, so private wells, a permit's not required to replace a water supply for single family residents. We talked about this, right? Well drillers are licensed and they can get you a water supply right as fast as possible. So they know where and when they can and can't drill, and then they will record it with us afterwards. And that's including if you're installing a well to disconnect from a shared supply or a municipal supply, if you don't want to continue with your municipal supply. And that those then have to also be recorded with the land records. Landowners are to provide prospective purchasers with education material on the benefits of water testing, right? So this is one of those things that your realtor usually actually deals with, but it's technically the landowner's requirement. You can go to the healthvermont.gov site, and they have fact sheets that tell you what you should get tested for. They're required to be tested prior to their initial use, right? So you drill a new well. Part of our permit says that you have to get the well tested, and those test results have to go to the Department of Health. And if it's a shared well, it has to also come to us. We recommend that every time a property sells, that the well gets retested. If you have a history of an issue with your well, I highly recommend testing even more frequently. Various things can happen, and when you get your retest results back, depending on what you sort of pop for, it'll tell you what you should do to treat. Some of them are going to be as easy, right, as dumping a bottle of bleach down your well and sort of letting that sit for about an hour and then running the water through your system for a day before you drink it, right? That's going to be if you pop positive for really like any of the pathogens. Sometimes they'll get in, right? Gopher will get into your well, or a mouse burrow, right? And that's going to introduce a pathogen, and that's an easy fix. Sometimes it's a little more complicated, and you're going to need a treatment system. Things like gross alpha or uranium is actually fairly common in Vermont, right? Because it comes out of bedrock, granite bedrock in Vermont. And those you're going to want to get a treatment system for. Sometimes it's going to be as easy as putting one of the faucet filter systems on, right? A Pure or a Brita filter system can easily also take care of a lot of the issues. But you don't know if there's an issue if you don't test for it, and I highly recommend testing for it. If you have more questions, you can always reach out to me or your regional engineer. We also have a website. I think it's kind of hard to find things on our website, so sometimes it's easier to just call us. But you can go to the website for the Department of Environmental Conservation, drinking water and groundwater, wastewater systems and potable water supplies. Right, and then program, education, outreach, and resources. Other places you might want to visit are designer licensing. Okay, that's where I keep the list of current designers. You can also go to our permit search, which allows you to search for your permit along with any other documents we have on that permit, including any ongoing testing, maintenance, compliance issues. And the innovative alternative website that I showed you earlier. Right, so a designer can also answer your questions. Permit specialists, right? So you can go to the environmental assistance permit specialists. They are aware of all of the permit requirements across the Department of Environmental Conservation. You can contact your regional engineer. Right, you can contact me. I will tell you since we've been short-staffed for the last year due to some retirements, I probably get about 30 to 40 phone calls a day. So it is harder for me to get back to everyone via phone, but I am really good about keeping up to date on the email. So email's a little better if you need me. If you're still unhappy or unsure, you can contact my brand new program manager. He's been in the job for 1 month and is just getting his feet under him, but you feel free to contact Bruce Douglas as well. Right, and so like I said earlier, right, engineered wastewater systems and the protection of potable water supplies is considered the single greatest human achievement, saving more lives than all of medical science. And we do take that responsibility very seriously in Drinking Water and Groundwater Protection Division. Any questions? Let me go back to...
Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
I did have a question about, can I plant any shrubs flanking that long pipe that goes from the holding tank to the leach field?
The holding tank to the leach field, you can. I would keep it to shrubs. Right, trees have the potential of knocking that pipe out of placement. But right, because that pipe doesn't actually leach water, or it shouldn't be leaching water. So you can do a shrub, but nothing with a sort of a root system that's going to potentially push the pipe.
Okay, and the other question I had is, the leach field I have is not far from the edge of my property, which is overgrown with brambles, blackberries, I guess they are. And from time to time, I find them cropping up in my leach field, and I pull them out, but they do have these sort of underground stems that go everywhere.
They do. In fact, I recommend sort of making sure that there's nothing 15 feet around the edges of your leach fields. So I would not only pull them in the leach field area, I'd start to pull the bushes out that are about 15 feet away.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yep. In the chat, it looks like we have the question of how long do most current individual wastewater systems work? 10, 20, 30 years? So we like to say that they should last a minimum of 20 years. Right, a well-designed system at a minimum should last 20 years. That being said, a really well-designed system can last indefinitely, right? So my system was actually installed in 1970, right? And the system I'm referring to was actually installed in 1970 by my grandfather, right? So I happen to know the maintenance record on this, right? And I had it inspected recently when I took over ownership of the property, right? And for a 50-year-old system, you would have thought it was installed yesterday. So I would say with a well-maintained, well-designed, well-installed system, indefinitely, at a minimum 20 years. If it's less than 20 years, right, I have one recently that failed after 7. I'm out there, the regional design engineer is out there, and we are figuring out why that failed. And it's usually somebody didn't do something right. But we will go out there and investigate, because they should not be going that quickly. You should at least get 2 decades out of it. Are the septic failures sniffing dogs that you or other have you used to detect failed systems? Is this a reasonable idea that could work if this is not currently being done? I have heard of them. I'm unaware of any in Vermont. Right, mainly because it puts the dog in danger. right? If they're sniffing on the ground and they get exposed to this water, they can get exposed to pathogens that will also harm them. So it's not something we have done in Vermont. But I am aware that there are dogs that do this. I would typically say if the system is really failing, you shouldn't need the dog, right? You can smell it, you can walk the land and find out where things are soggy. Just because I don't personally like, making animals do things that I am not willing to do myself.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
I had never had something that wasn't the public sewer system when I moved here 10 years ago, and I was afraid of putting any kind of disinfectant down the toilet because it would kill the organisms in the holding tank.
I would say, again, this is right, don't be excessive about it, right? You shouldn't be pouring an entire bottle of bleach down at one time, right? That's part of that dilution factor we were talking about. That being said, every time you go to the bathroom, you're introducing thousands of brand new bacteria into your septic tank. And I would also say, right, there's a couple of companies right now that are selling additives, right? I know of one, it's a blue bottle and they're selling it for $60 a month. They'll come and pour it down your tank, into your tank, and they say there's 10,000 colonies of bacteria in it. You're probably putting down more than that every day.
Okay. Yeah, I like to clean it with Ajax or something like that. So
Yeah.
I was afraid the chlorine in it would kill the bacteria.
Yeah, if you're talking about a little bit of chlorine, you're okay. If you're talking a whole bottle of bleach, your dilution factor is probably off there. But yeah, no, a little Ajax every now and then is perfectly fine. And then you replace anything you kill off almost immediately.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, and I tell people the only reason you should ever be buying that additive, the only time it's ever been shown that it's doing anything is particularly cancer patients. If there are only people in the house who are receiving cancer treatment, the cancer treatment kills off their entire biome. And so that there's nobody introducing new bacteria. And so for them, yes, buying bacteria to put into the system is a benefit. If you are not in that situation, you can use limited amounts of cleaning product, and there is no reason to buy added.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. How is land division transfer impacted by the size of potential drain fields? So we require, before you can subdivide your land, you have to identify an area that can support a drain field that will allow for the flow you currently have. Right, so you can't add a bedroom unless you have additional area that you can come back to us and identify. But if you have a 3-bedroom house, the designer will figure out how much land you need for a replacement system. They will identify that area, right? And so we make sure that when you subdivide, you at least keep that land that you are going to need for potentially for a replacement system. So we don't let you go down too small, right? We're going to make sure that you have the ability, right? We don't let you give away your solutions. Are there any other questions? We've got just a couple minutes left, but I know it's a lot of information. And I appreciate any feedback. I modify this usually after every time I give it, based on people's feedback. So I would appreciate any of that you'd like to pass my way. You will get copies of a PDF of all these slides. And if you need to refer back, like I said, I know it is a lot of information I threw at you tonight. But hopefully it was at least a little bit entertaining. Because I know it's hard on a Thursday night to sort of devote 2 hours to wastewater.
We enjoyed your children.
Oh, thank you.
Cristin, it looks like there are 2 more questions in the chat.
Oh, okay.
Can you add beer to a tank?
If you want to.
I heard it helps. I don't know. I heard it helps. I don't know, like Riddex or something.
So that's right. That's an additive. It was adding bacteria. Right. I used to hear also people got advised to add a packet of yeast every now and then to your tank. It doesn't harm the tank. Beer doesn't, right? That's an activated yeast product. It's not going to harm the tank, but you're putting down plenty of bacteria just by going to the bathroom. So really, you've just wasted a pretty good beer. But you haven't harmed anything by doing it. Again, unless of course the cancer treatments, and then it is a beer activated yeast packet will do it as well. Because of the problems of septic systems close to lakes, ponds, and water bodies, you have extra requirements for systems close to water bodies. So you need, right, we require a certain setback. Basically, you're going to need that 2-year time of travel before your wastewater can get to a water body. If you can't meet that, which is often the case for homes that were built on bodies of water, then we're going to require you to have an IA system. We're going to require you to have pretreatment. So yes, in a sort of roundabout way, we do have extra requirements, but if you have enough land that we can get a 2-year time of treatment before it hits that body of water, then no, we won't require extra. We're just going to require that space before it hits a body of water. I'm looking at a property with an old system. What do you do? I would hire a designer to take a look at it. The best thing to do, right? Have the current homeowner pump out the septic tank, have the septic tank inspected, right? You're going to want to make sure that there's no cracks, nothing visibly wrong with the septic tank. And then have the designer dig out the corners of the leach field and look at the stone, right? The biomat is actually black and it turns the stone black. So if you dig down and your stone gets black fairly quickly, that's indication that your biomat is getting pretty thick, right? If they dig down and your stone looks clean, and they can actually dig down through the stone and it looks clean all the way down, that's a really good leach field. If it's turning black, it means that you're a ticking time bomb and you're going to need a new leach field sooner rather than later. And any designer would be happy to do that for you. Maybe not right now, because right now I get constant complaints from the designers that they're all overworked because it is an ever decreasing pool of designers as people retire. And apparently this is not an industry that a lot of young people want to get into. And with the COVID uptick in real estate and failed systems, there are now designers who are in their 80s working 60 hours a week, but under normal conditions, they would be happy to go out and look at your leach field.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening, Cristin.
No problem.
This was a lot of information.
Yeah, very helpful. Thank you.
No problem.
There'll be a follow-up email with the PDFs of the slideshow from this evening and some contact info if you have questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great night.
You too.